She chose the corner table, the one with its back to the wall and a clear sightline to the door, which I only noticed because I had been doing the same thing in coffee shops for 5 years, sitting where I could see who was coming, in case it was someone I wasn't ready to see. She was already there when I arrived, both hands around her mug, watching the door. When she saw me, she didn't smile straight away. She just looked at me for a moment, the way you look at something you've been trying to decide about for a long time, and then she said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "Of course." I sat down. I ordered a coffee I wasn't going to taste. "I've been wanting to tell you something," she said, "for 5 years. I want to start by saying that I know how this looks, and I've thought about that." She looked down at her mug and back up. "And I decided I'd rather tell you and have it look strange than not tell you and spend another 5 years not telling you." That was the sentence that changed the temperature of the room. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 35. I do technical writing for a software company, user manuals, help documentation, the kind of writing that nobody reads until something goes wrong, and then they read it very fast while something is going wrong. I live alone in a 1-bedroom flat on the 3rd floor of a building with a lift that works approximately 70% of the time, and I have a fairly organized life that contains no major complications, which I have maintained with some effort for the past 5 years. 5 years ago, I was with someone for 3. Her name was Caitlin Walsh. We met at a mutual friend's birthday, dated through our late 20s, and ended with the specific difficulty of 2 people who had been good to each other, but had been slowly becoming wrong for each other in a way neither of us could fix. The ending was mutual in the way some endings are, agreed upon, reasonably clean, genuinely sad. We haven't spoken since. I don't think she'd want me to contact her. I don't think I want to either. Her older sister's name is Diane Walsh. She's 38. She works in hospital administration, logistics and staffing, the kind of work that runs on precision and the ability to hold a great many things in your head without dropping any of them. I met Diane the same week I met Caitlin, at that same birthday party. And I spent the 3 years I was with Caitlin in the specific position of thinking her sister was one of the more interesting people I'd ever encountered, and doing absolutely nothing about that thought because it was exactly the kind of thought you don't have when you're in a relationship with someone and you are not a person who does things like that. We had gotten along well in the way of people who are in each other's orbit, but not each other's lives. She came to dinners. She asked good questions and listened to the answers. She had a dry, precise sense of humor that operated below the surface of most conversations, and she watched things with the attention of someone who was always quietly working something out. I'd liked her very much and kept it in the compartment marked appropriate, and then the relationship ended and she became the sister of my ex, and I stopped seeing her entirely. She had texted me 3 weeks ago. Out of nowhere, or what seemed like nowhere, a number I still had, a name I still recognized, a message that said simply, "Would you be up for coffee sometime?" Just to catch up. No weirdness intended. I'd sat with that message for 2 days, trying to decode what it meant and failing. And then I'd replied yes because I didn't have a reason not to, and because I was, honestly, curious in a way I hadn't admitted to myself was curiosity. And now I was in a corner coffee shop, and she was telling me she'd been holding something for 5 years. She wrapped both hands around her mug the way she had at those dinners, the gesture I'd apparently retained with more specificity than I'd realized. The coffee shop was warm and smelled of roasting beans and December outside, and the light through the window had the quality of a day that had decided not to commit to itself. "I want to be clear about something first," she said. "Caitlin doesn't know I'm here. This isn't a message from her or about her. This is entirely from me. And it has nothing to do with what ended between you and her. I'm not here to revisit that, or explain anything about it, or ask anything about it. Okay, I said. I'm also aware, she said, that there is a version of this conversation that looks like a significant overstep. I want you to know I've considered that at length. What version are you worried about? I asked. She looked at me with the directness she had, the quality that had always made me feel, when we were in the same room, that she was actually looking at me rather than in my general direction. The version, she said, where I tell you that I spent 3 years watching you be with my sister and doing the thing you do when you know something and can't say it, and now it's been 5 years since that ended. And I asked you to coffee because I am 38 years old and I've had enough of not saying things. The coffee shop was making ordinary noises. Someone's order being called. The door opening on the cold. My coffee, which I was not tasting, cooling in the cup. What do you know? I said. That's the wrong question, she said, not unkindly. The right question is what I've been not saying. I have poor instincts for a woman who can rearrange a question with the precision of someone who has been a logistics manager for 15 years and apply it to the problem of another person. She turned her mug once in her hands. A complete rotation, slow, the way someone moves when they're finding the words they came with. At your birthday dinner, she said, the one Caitlin organized in your second year together. She asked me to come early to help set up, and I arrived before everyone else, including you. And you came in and you didn't know I was there yet, and you put down your keys and you stood in your kitchen for about 30 seconds looking at everything Caitlin had done, and your face was... She stopped. She pressed her lips together once. Your face was grateful, but not in the way people look when something makes them happy. You looked grateful the way people look when they're doing the right thing very carefully. That landed somewhere specific. I told myself I was reading it wrong, she said. I was very committed to reading it wrong. For a long time. The thing about what she was describing is that she wasn't wrong. I had known, in some version of the way you know things before you've named them, that the relationship with Caitlin had a ceiling. I had known it, and I had been committed to not knowing it, because Caitlin was good, and I was fond of her, and the relationship was real even if it was also, quietly, wrong in a way I couldn't locate or correct. The birthday dinner was 2 years in. I had stood in my kitchen looking at what she'd done, and felt the weight of a life that fit well but didn't fit exactly. And I had said nothing because the language for that isn't a language anyone wants to use. Diane had seen it, from across a kitchen. And she'd kept it for 3 years of dinners and family gatherings and 100 conversations where she'd asked good questions and listened. And then she'd kept it for 5 more after I was gone. The thing I hadn't thought about, hadn't let myself think about, was how many specific moments I'd kept too. The dinner where she'd argued, with complete seriousness and an impressive knowledge of the subject, that the public library system was one of the most quietly radical achievements of democratic society. The afternoon she'd appeared at a barbecue Caitlin had organized, and spent an hour talking to Caitlin's neighbor's elderly father about his career as a marine engineer. Not out of politeness, but out of what was clearly genuine curiosity. Asking follow-up questions with the attention of someone who would remember the answers. The specific way she tilted her head a fraction to the left when something she was reading surprised her. The way she disagreed with people, directly, specifically, without apology, but also without pleasure in it. The way she said my name across a table, when she was asking me something real, like it had weight. I had logged all of this in the category of things that were not mine to log. I had been very disciplined about this. I had also, apparently, been keeping the logs. When her text arrived 3 weeks ago, I'd read it 4 times before I typed a reply. I'd shown it to my colleague David, who knew a fragment of the history, and David had looked at it, and looked at me and said, "Are you going?" with the tone of a man who already knew the answer and was mostly asking for confirmation. I said I thought so. He said, "Then you already know what this is." I said I didn't. He said, "Okay." He said it in a way that meant the opposite. I have thought about a great many things less carefully than she appears to have thought about this. After it ended, I said, "Why didn't you?" "Because you'd just come out of 3 years with my sister," she said. "Because I wasn't going to be the person who appeared in your life 2 weeks after a breakup with information about herself. Because it needed to not be about Caitlin, and it couldn't not be about Caitlin until some time had passed." She looked at me steadily. "And because I wasn't sure about what I was carrying, and whether it was the kind of thing that would survive contact with reality, or whether it was just proximity and history, and the particular way you asked questions at dinner that made people feel like their answers mattered." "How long did it take you to get sure?" I said. She held my gaze. "About 2 years. Then I sat on it for 3 more, because the timing never felt right, and then I turned 38 in October and decided that the timing is a reason I've been using the way other people use a good umbrella. It feels protective, but it's mostly just something to hold. That is not the comforting version. It is accurate." "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that too. I'm not here with an agenda or an expectation. I'm here because I've been not saying this for 5 years, and it has cost me more patience than I had to give it. And I thought you deserved to know it, and I thought I deserved to have said it." She looked at her mug, then back at me. "Whatever you do with it is yours." The window behind her had gone the gray gold of a December afternoon on its way out. The coffee shop was warm. Someone at the counter was having a long, pleasant disagreement about whether a specific syrup counted as a flavor or a modifier, and the staff member was winning. I said, "At that birthday dinner, when you saw my face in the kitchen." "Yes," she said. "When I turned around and you were there," I said, "you were standing next to the window and you had a glass of wine, and you'd been there long enough that you looked like you belonged in the room." And I thought. I stopped. I looked at the table. I looked back at her. I thought something that I immediately put somewhere I wasn't going to look at it, and then I spent the rest of the dinner being very interested in the conversation and not looking at that thing. She was very still. "I've been not looking at it for 5 years," I said. "Because you were Caitlin's sister, and then because it had been a year, and then because it had been 2. And every year there was a different version of a reason that felt sufficient, and none of them were actually the reason." I held her gaze. "The reason was that I didn't know what to do with something I hadn't earned. You were never mine to think about." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, December was doing what December does. Inside, the room was warm and smelled of coffee, and something in it had shifted with the particular finality of a thing that has been approaching for a long time arriving. "I appreciate that," she said. Her voice had dropped slightly. Not much, just the half register that meant she was saying the real version of something. "I want to point out that it's been 5 years. The question of whether you've earned the right to think about something is probably expired as an obstacle." "That's fair," I said. "And I want to point out," she said, "that I just told you, in a corner coffee shop in December, that I have been carrying something for 5 years, and that I turned 38 and decided to be done not saying it." She looked at me with the directness she'd always had, the kind that made you feel seen rather than scrutinized. "That is not a small thing to say. I'd like to know what you're going to do with it." I looked at her. The hands around the mug, The watching the door quality that I recognized now as something that was not about caution, but about waiting for a specific thing, or a specific person, or simply for the right moment to stop being patient. "Can I ask you something first?" I said. "Yes," she said. "The corner table," I said. "Back to the wall. Clear sightline to the door." She glanced at the table, back at me. "Yes, I've been doing that in coffee shops for 5 years," I said. "I've never worked out whether it's habit or something else." She held my eyes for 1 second longer than felt safe. Then she said, quietly, "I've been doing it for 5 years too. I've never worked out the answer either." Something in me snapped into place. Quietly, completely, I looked at her for a moment. At the corner table and the hands around the mug and the watching the door quality, I now understood differently. And I thought, 5 years is a long time to keep something precisely this, carefully, for no return, with no guarantee it would ever matter. Most people would have let it go. Most people would have filed it under an old feeling about someone who was no longer relevant and moved on to something easier. The fact that she was sitting here in December at a corner table, telling me what she knew and what she'd chosen with it, that was not a small thing. That was the specific weight of someone who had decided at 38 that the life she wanted was worth the risk of saying so. I had been waiting for a reason to say something for 5 years. She had given me one. The least I could do was say the thing. "There's a place 2 streets from here," I said, "that does Sunday morning coffee and doesn't play music and has a table in the corner with its back to the wall. I've been going there alone for 5 years." I looked at her. "I'd like to go with someone. I'd like to go with you." She looked at me steadily. Something moved across her expression. Not much, just a small releasing of something that had been carefully, precisely held. "That's a Sunday invitation," she said. "Yes, it's Thursday." "I'm aware of that." The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. The particular shift that I realized now had always come just before something real. "Sunday, then," she said. And she looked down at her mug and picked it up and took a careful sip with the composure of a woman who has been waiting for 5 years and is absolutely not going to let 4 more days show on her face. "For what it's worth," I said, "I'm glad you told me." She looked up. "I'm glad I didn't wait any longer," she said. Then, quietly, with the half-register she used for things that cost her something, "I thought about you more than made sense, Nathan, for a long time. I want you to know it wasn't casual." "I know," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "I kept the logs," I said. "I just filed them in the wrong place." That got the smallest real smile from her. Not the composed one, the actual one, the one that arrived before she'd decided to let it. She held it for 1 second, and then looked back at her mug, and that second was sufficient. We stayed for another hour. We talked about work, her hospital restructure, my latest documentation project, the mutual absurdity of jobs that require precision in environments that resist it. She had opinions about a podcast I'd mentioned, and told me so without preamble. I had opinions about a book she'd read, and she said she disagreed with mine, and we disagreed about it, with the ease of people who have somehow already gotten through the difficult part. When we left, she pulled her coat on and stood on the pavement in the December cold and looked at me once, the way she'd looked at me when I walked in, the look of someone checking that the thing is real and finding that it is. "Sunday," she said. "Sunday," I said. She walked away in the direction of the hospital, and I stood on the pavement and did not move for longer than was strictly necessary, in the way of a man who has just understood that the 5 years he thought he spent waiting were in fact 5 years he spent arriving. Sunday was the beginning. Everything after that was the thing itself. 6 months later, She met me at the corner table so often that the staff at the Sunday place had started having our order ready when we walked in, which Diane found professionally interesting from a logistics standpoint, and which I found quietly perfect in a way I didn't fully explain. A year after that, the table in the corner with its back to the wall and the sight line to the door was where we went when one of us had a difficult week, because by then it had stopped being a habit and become something else. A place we'd made into ours the same slow way everything between us had built, steadily and without announcement. 2 years in, when people asked how we'd met, I said we'd been in each other's lives for 8 years. Diane said we'd been paying attention for 5, and in a corner coffee shop in December, a woman who had decided at 38 that she was done not saying things would say. It was never about the timing. It was about the moment one of you stops choosing the patience that has stopped being patient and starts choosing the thing you've known all along. She was right. She usually was. It had probably always been Diane. I had just been very careful, for a very long time, about the kinds of things I was allowed to notice. What would you have done if someone you'd had to put out of your mind for years finally sat down across from you and told you why? And have you ever kept something safe for so long, so carefully, so reasonably, that the keeping became its own way of losing it? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.